technicians of Spaceship Earth. This is your podcast speaking. Your podcast is dead. Fatal timeline rupture detected. Do not panic. If you are making love during a fatal timeline rupture, this is a strange choice of podcast to have on. Do not attempt to change the amount of dimensions your spacecraft currently occupies. We are approaching the timeline rupture. Distance to rupture is running out. Time is running out. Love is running out. Food is running out. Water is running out. Acid is running out. Fuel is running out. Ideas for this list is running out.
Time, 1700 hours. Date, February 2024. Position, the Zoom Interstellar Network. An unexpected time storm has pushed us forward to the exact point when we were due to review the album Somnia by Hawkwind, leaving a trail of abandoned albums in our wake. While we look for a way to return to the past, we welcome everyone who survived the time storm to Hawkbinge, your somnambulistic journey through the Hawkwind discography, one album at a time, for the first time in the company of 3 first-time listeners. That will be myself, Matt, in New York, Andy in Brighton, and just emerging from his cocoon, Mr. Joe Banks. How are we, gentlemen?
I am very well, thank you, Matt. And yeah, it's good to be here. And welcome,
Thank
Joe.
You, Matt. Yep.
And Joe, of course, the author, as everyone who listens to us regularly will know, of Days of the Underground, Radical Experimentation in the Age of Paranoia, a brilliant book. So welcome aboard, Joe.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. I hope not too many people are thinking, oh no, not this guy again. But hopefully I can kind of, contribute in a useful fashion.
Joe, although your book centers on Hawkwind in the 70s, you've kind of kept up. I remember you saying that you quite liked Carnivorous, for example.
That's right. Yeah. I think there was a large gap in my Hawk knowledge, if you like, from about the mid 90s kind of onwards. But I did pick up again, obviously, a few years ago when I started writing the book. And so, yeah, no, I'm pretty familiar with all of the more recent catalogue as well.
Matt, that does not hold true for you.
No, this is going to be very strange for me, jumping from 1977 to 2021. It's weird, but it's been interesting to to break the timeline and be able to talk about what Hawkwind is doing right now in such an amazing company.
It's odd to be faced with the person whose words I've been reading out over the last 8 months or so.
But gratifying for me, which means that if he's coming on the podcast, I haven't said too many things which have made me ostracize me within the community.
No, not at all. And I've been incredibly, proud that you guys have kind of used the book as such a resource. I mean, that's what it's there for, and it's brilliant that it's helped you in your voyage through the 1970s.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Joe. It certainly has.
So we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. Normally we do our turntable picks and we talk about the time and all these kind of things. We're not going to do that this time because we are we will be returning to this album properly chronologically in due time, as our intro suggested, around the start of 2024, if we get to do these at a rate that we normally do. But to break the timeline now and talk about this, what we have done is on launch day, listen to this album as many times as we can and are going to each give our own hot takes track by track so we can contribute to Hawkwind in the meta rather than histrionically as we have been doing thus far.
Yep, that's epic. And it's interesting for me to ask, Joe, did you have any expectations of this going in?
I don't know, because Hawkwind continue to be an incredibly prolific band. And as I think I've said before, the thing about Hawkwind is that much like The Fall, they're always the same, but they're always different. So you kind of know to a certain extent what you're getting, certainly over the last few albums, but there are always some surprises along the way as well. And, I was surprised by this album, as we'll discuss.
And Matt is always surprised. The interesting thing here is that Matt sends me a message after his first listen to the albums as we do them. And that message is usually, what on earth is this? And then over repeated plays, he finds something in his deep listening process, TM, basically, and kind of works it out. But in this case, we're all in the boat of just being in the what on earth is this mode of only just having listened to it. I was slightly nervous, I have to say. If I'm invested in a band, I kind of want it to be good for them as much as I want to like it myself, just because of being with the band for so many years. Newer bands, I don't have that. I don't care as much. But in this one, yeah, it was definitely, I'm always slightly nervous. And the first track off the last two albums wasn't my favorite, which makes me more nervous still.
I feel like for me, this was a little bit I was in a disadvantage in the time frame that I have, because when I woke up, it was, like it had been out for a while. But given the fact that we're recording at my midday, I've only really been able to listen to it properly like maybe 2.5 times. So my reactions are going to be way less considered than usual, but I will totally give them and see what happens.
Well, Joe and I both had days that collapsed into chaos and madness with the soundtrack of the new Hawkwind album. So the whole thing feels very much like it should. So, well, we should kick off, shouldn't we? Who's going to tackle Unsomnia first?
So it's a little bit of a tradition that I'm never really a huge fan of the first Hawkwind track whenever we talk about these. And the fact that when I texted you, the very first thing I heard when the intro riff comes on for this track, Unsomnia, is that it sounds like the intro to My Sharona. It probably means that I'm not such a fan of it as usual. So the tradition stays the same. I thought it was a strange opening track, given listening to all the tracks that we have. I guess the track is, the album is called Somnia, therefore we have Unsomnia at the beginning. It almost feels like titally we're already fighting against this idea that we're setting up. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I think the riff feels a little bit kind of basic for Hawkwind from what I've heard before. Again, like I'm judging this purely on the stuff I've heard now in the late 70s, but the sound design over the top of the riff is nicely done. Even if the foundation of the track feels a little uninspired. Instantly, the phrase heebie-jeebies is a little bit like doolally on Damnation Alley. I don't like it when Hawkwind use these strange little colloquialisms. It's a bit off for me and kind of throws me out of the idea, but it's, whatever. I think that the drums are very soft in it. So we're already going for this kind of like, it's not a clattering kind of percussive piece that we've heard from Hawkwind before. There are fills and there are big cymbal crashes, but they have very little impact because they feel like they're being recorded like in another room on purpose, I'm sure. But the one thing on the second listening to this track is that halfway through the track, both times, all the things that kind of annoy me about it, the basicness of the riff and kind of like the fact it doesn't seem to be like hitting particularly hard, I forget all about, and I actually find myself kind of nodding along to it. So it's a strange track that I begin thinking, ugh, kind of like at the end, I think fine, and then it dissolves into this ambience at the end, which seems nicely appropriate considering we're talking about Somnia. I think the track is okay. For me, it wouldn't be the one that I opened with because I feel like it just slows the pace massively for the rest of the listening experience when you go into that kind of ambience at the very beginning.
Fair. It's a strange choice as opening track. I've got to say that it did a lot to calm my nerves because I really liked it. The basicness of it had kind of almost a krautrocky feel to it. I thought when it opened up and you had that little guitar riff thing, I thought it was going to become Sexy Boy by Air. It had that kind of feel to it. But lyrically, I know what you mean. It's a little twee on the lyrics, but I quite like the fact that it almost becomes like a drone, basically. And I rather like that. I like the fact that it's 10 minutes long and it's given room. and it just kind of it moves along and grows, and as you say, the sound design behind it. So yeah, I was quite excited by this, and quite positive about it, particularly given that I'd been slightly nervous before. And I like the fact that it's first, because on the vinyl it means I've got a nice big aiming area to put the needle down when it's the one I want to hear. Joe.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, what was interesting, I think, for this track was that it was such a overtly krautrock influenced track. And obviously that's always been kind of in Hawkwind's makeup from the very start, but here they've totally embraced it. And my Sharona is an interesting comparison, and you know, in a way you're completely right, but I think actually what it sounds like, it's the bass line from Mother Sky by Can, except for it's played on the guitar. I think that's pretty much what we've got there. And I think, you know, as you say, it's an opening track, it's 10 minutes long, and as I said, I'm not entirely familiar with every song that Hawkwind have recorded after the 1970s, but it feels to me that this kind of trance rock track, you know, a 10-minute trance rock track, they haven't actually done that many of these, you know, for a long time. So it's interesting to have kind of gone into that territory. I agree that the vocals and some of the lyrics are a bit, you know, it sounds like kind of somebody just kind of improvising off the top of their head. But the "oh no, they're coming to get me" line did make me smile, because obviously this is kind of paranoia writ large, and paranoia is a defining feature of Hawkwind from the very beginning, which is why it's obviously in the title of my book. So it's quite funny that popped out as well. And I think Matt's exactly right. I think, you know, you actually just kind of ease back into this, and it kind of washes over you, and that's what it's meant to do. And you've got quite nice sound design, lots of little kind of sounds coming in and out, and then it eases down towards the end, and I think that's the idea, that we're meant to be drifting off to sleep. And it's got some quite nice ambient kind of Tangerine Dream-esque kind of keys at the end. So my conclusion I've got here in my notes is good. Thumbs up.
It's a positive start.
The one thing about the ending of this, how it then goes into the next track, kind of, I feel like it proved my feelings, as it suddenly, then the next track, Strange Encounters, comes kind of out of nowhere. Like they've tried to dull you into sleep, and then suddenly in comes this way more hard, way more like rocking, way more aggressive track, possibly the most aggressive track on the album, I feel. And I know that after the first listen, I know that it's coming, so it's not the big surprise that I guess the first time you hear it is, but then I just find myself bracing for it, and after that initial shock wears off, it kind of annoys me that I know that that's what they've tried to do. I feel like, you know, dissolving into ambience at the end leads nicely to this track, but just because they've made this clever idea of like, oh, we're asleep, now we're being shocked awake, it doesn't make it any less annoying. And then that just makes me very just then anti the track, because I feel like it's like kind of woken me up. So I feel like it gets punished by its own theme from what Hawkwind are trying to do with it. I don't really have many more notes on it, apart from just it clatters in, and again, it isn't what I would put for the second track, given again the rest of the tracks are much more mellow. I feel like this one kind of spoils the journey quite a lot for me.
I like the fact that you don't like being woken up after you've drifted off, and the big noise comes in. I mean, I think it's an exciting opening. I love the fact that there's some of Dave Rock's wah-wah is in there. You know, it's a good, nice sound, a big charge of the guitars, there's some pounding drums. It's one of those ones that when you hear it, you think, okay, is this going to go somewhere though? And I quite liked it. I thought the verses are okay. For some reason, the chanted vocals on it reminded me a bit of some of the stuff that Eno did in the 1970s when he was doing his vocal albums. And I think actually the guitar playing on here, there's quite an extended solo, I assume from Brock. And I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, you know, his soloing guitar on some of those early albums is pretty rudimentary, but he's definitely got better over time. And I actually quite like his style now. And so I thought that was yeah, a good solo. I've got what else I've got here. I've got some proper heavy drums as well. That's considered criticism for you. And I've got good plus. So there we go.
Well played. Well played. I have to say, I think Matt used the word clattering, and I've been searching for the right word. I had like crazy, busy, but clattering is the right word. But for me, clattering in a really good way, because there is power in this, and there is power in the drums, but it's not a straight 4/4 thumping rhythm. It's like it's kind of happening all over the place. The drums are just filling in the space, and kind of giving you that craziness. And I was quite excited hearing it, and I did like it. And as a counterpoint to the end of Unsomnia, that worked for me in exactly the same way that it didn't work for Matt. So yeah, I was very happy with this, and you know, 2 on the trot that I liked was probably more than I expected, to be honest. So yeah, happy days. And that takes us to a track that I don't really know how to pronounce its title, to be honest. I don't know if anybody else wants to have a stab at pronouncing this.
Given that it's Greek, I think it might be Alcyone, like Halcyon.
Okay.
I looked it up. Alcyone means hummingbird in Greek.
Oh,
and
nice.
It's actually from a Greek goddess who was turned into a hummingbird, because didn't everyone get turned into something back in Greek god times?
Yeah. Nice.
But the star named after her is the brightest star in the Taurus constellation.
So revealed for all the listeners is who does the research on the Hawkbinge podcast, laid bare. It's and I guess that's probably the story of the track then. I didn't hate this. It's there. It's like a fairly singular mood throughout. It doesn't really kind of change or go to any new places. It's quite ambient and dreamy, and I kind of found it pleasant. You know, enough to listen to. I wouldn't skip it, but definitely it's not as much of an excitement for me as the first 2 tracks on it. So nice, you know, a bit downbeat, dreamy, like the mood. Definitely not a bad mark, but kind of just pleasant enough for me.
Mm. Yeah, no, I would absolutely go along with that. I quite like this. I think it's one of the tracks that Magnus sings on. I don't know actually if he has written it as well. And I find that the problem I have with Magnus' singing often is that he doesn't feel confident enough in his own voice. Either that or he's not mixed high enough in the mix. I kind of feel that he could actually probably deliver it better. And it always sounds like, I don't know, whether it's like a rough guide track and they've used that rather than a proper vocal. But I thought there was, again, some nice playing here from Brock. And, you know, given its tempo and a mood, it inevitably made me think a little bit of Fable, of a Fabled Race from Quite Strength and Charm. It's got that kind of cosmic ballad kind of feel to it. So again, not a classic track, but, you know, kind of quite nicely turned, and, you know, I got pretty good here.
This actually reminded me of Space is Deep, in a similar way of feeling like it was going back to things that I like about Hawkwind. This was the first track which actually I settled into after the first 2. I kind of like that loungy, contemplative kind of style that Hawkwind bring. This felt a little bit more modern, though, for sure. It felt more up to date. It actually reminded me of something more like 07, who, you know, take that kind of like lounge feel, but just bring a little bit more upbeatness to it. I thought the guitar was really nicely performed. Again, I like it when in some of the other tracks coming forward as well, that when they put the guitar higher in the mix, I do like the detail of it. You know, like with things like Space is Deep with the 12-string guitars and things. When I shut my eyes, I can almost feel the fingers on the strings being really close to the mic. So I guess that always helps pull me in to the whole experience. I didn't really get a feel for the lyrics. I do actually like trying to now read the lyrics along while I listen, but because this is so new, no one's done a lyric sheet yet, and I could only grab whatever I could snatch from my ears. But I also thought Damnation Alley was saying Third Nation Army for the first few times I was listening to that track. So I don't trust myself listening to it ever to know whether or not that's actually the lyrics that they're saying. So yeah, I just listened to this as basically an instrumental, and yeah, I thought it was nice. I know we say nice, like, but actually nice, like, nice. Good, nice. The only thing that really was a shame for me in this track was the fact it faded, and the last two tracks have dissolved into a kind of ambience rather than faded, and have kind of blended into each other. This is the first one that just kind of fades to a silence, which is a shame, because I feel like this is the track which would actually benefit from a bit more of an ambient finish. I wanted this one to finish well, and the fade is, it's fine, but I always find a fade slightly unsatisfying. But for me, this is the track which made me start to warm to the theme of this album.
It's also the last track on side one of the vinyl.
Is it a double EP then?
No, it's a single LP. There are 13 tracks on the digital. There are 10 on the vinyl. So 3 of the tracks that we heard don't make it to the vinyl, and we'll get to that. But yeah, the first 3 tracks are side one, and that's a pretty strong side one of a single album. I actually, weirdly, although I like tracks that are not on it, I like the fact that they only made a single album, because I think most double albums really, an average double album could be a magnificent single album. So I quite like that. But yeah, and that takes us to Counting Sheep. I think, Joe, do you want to go first on this one?
Not really, no. But this was where my notes actually start to run out a little bit. The first note I've got here is Dave's scary old uncle persona, which it is a bit. It's a bit like, oh, here's Uncle Dave to tell you a ghost story. This is kind of the type of track that Hawkwind have done a bit more recently, which gets away from the more traditional space rock, and actually, if you stripped out the vocals and the guitar from this track, what you'd have is more of a kind of experimental trip hop track, kind of, towards the end of the 90s. It's that kind of vibe, which is actually quite nice. But I think the vocals and the guitar actually are working against it slightly. In a way, I would prefer to hear this track without those elements. And it also kind of, it then goes into a kind of crusty dub vibe as well, that kind of festival vibe, which, Hawkwind were stalwarts of the free festival scene in the 70s, but obviously right into the 80s as well, when that kind of dub reggae sound was resounding around the fields of England as well, and that's certainly kind of a part of this track. I thought it was okay, but again, not one I'd be rushing to hear again.
This is as close to a Hawkwind lament that I feel we're going to get in this album. The idea of someone who can't get sleep. There's a few of these this theme is carried through the album somewhat. When we get to a few down the way, I'll call it back again. But yeah, as Joe just said, that idea of not being able to sleep, that strange kind of idea of this being like a hell that you're trapped in, is some of the way the vocals are delivered felt a little bit like that kind of Hawkwind lament that we've heard before, but I feel like it's like lament light. I certainly feel they've leaned into it way more before, but I just got a little bit of that vibe from this track. I just feel like the idea of counting sheep feels a bit beneath Hawkwind somehow. I know we've joked about before them bringing that idea of banality into the future and kind of making it feel relatable, the idea of the robot that breaks because they didn't sign forms, or that kind of thing is weird. But then because it's so kind of banal, you're caught up in the actual life of that, and you can relate to it. This, yeah, fine, we've all not been able to sleep before, but I've never felt it being quite as big horror show. So the idea of just talking about counting sheep just feels a little basic, and I felt like the lyrics I got from this just felt a little bit like that. But to what Joe said as well, like the latter third of this track is the first hint that we're going to get this groove dub kind of vibe through a lot of the track. And then through a lot of the album, this is the first time where that idea is kind of teased in the track. And given the fact that that becomes quite predominant through the other, the current tracks that we'll hear, I was not expecting that, because I don't think it's really come up in any of the stuff we've listened to yet. And again, you know, there is this big gap between what I've listened to and what I'm listening to now. So if this is something that they have done before, then cool. But for me, it was very surprising. I wasn't expecting Hawkwind to be in a groove dub kind of vibe. And also I wasn't expecting them to be so good at it. I actually quite like this stuff. It actually gets my head nodding. This Counting Sheep track's a little bit like the first track for me, where I'm like, all the bits I don't like, by halfway through it, as it changes again and evolves, I kind of forget all about it and I nod my head quite happily to the last third of it, and then we move on.
It's a strange one, Counting Sheep. I thought at the beginning it's fairly bonkers in what's going on, and it was a bit of an oddity, and I was quite happy with it. Without being blown away, without kind of being excited by it. It seemed to be a nice kind of crazy start to side 2 of the vinyl. A strange thing continuing on from whatever you said the last track was called. That was more difficult for me to deal with that transition. A little bit like you, Matt, struggled with the transition between Unsomnia and Strange Encounters. I struggled between the transition between these two. Strangely, when they got into the dub part, I really liked the fact that they did it. And I was kind of smiling at the fact that they did it. But I don't actually like it, which I know is a very strange thing to say. But I kind of love the fact that they've gone there because of the history and the tradition, and that they are quite good at it. It's not really anything that really gets me going. So it's a strange oddity for me, Counting Sheep. It never quite catches fire for me, but it's a serviceable start to the second side of the vinyl, at least.
Is this something that they're known for? Again, is this just my naivety talking? Is dub something that they have brought sonically to their albums before?
Only really, as Joe said, being part of that festival scene, I think in the early 80s, I would say. They did some of it, and I think there's some albums we'll come to where you kind of get a flavor for it. They didn't do like a dub album or anything like this, or basically in the same way as maybe you got the producer from Killing Joke became this massive figure in the kind of dub scene. That didn't really happen for Hawkwind as far as I remember, but they definitely just have elements of what's going on around them in the music, and in the 80s and in that festival scene. That was where this would have come from. Would you say, John?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. They did have that guy Captain Riz kind of with them for a while.
Oh yeah.
Did he do kind of toasting on stage with them? This is very much in the period of Hawkwind I know very little about, but I assume there must have been some kind of dub reggae influence in there as well. It's interesting though, because for dub to work properly, there needs to be a certain amount of spaciousness within the music. And even though Hawkwind is space rock, it tends to be, their version of space rock is this kind of crushing blackness a lot of the time. Whereas here, the music opens up and it actually works quite nicely. But I think, as you said, it's something which I kind of smile to and perhaps quite like. But I don't think I want too much dub in my Hawkwind music.
I kind of like how the synth stuff that they have almost like mimics that kind of heavy delay that you have in classic dub. So I do think there was like a bit of a Hawkwind take on it, in the same way things like Steppenwolf, that almost kind of Hawkwind does Santana, they do enough to make it theirs. I was interested in this by thinking like, oh, there's familiar ingredients, but I did feel it was different compared to other things that I'd heard.
Cool. And that takes us to China Blues. Shall I kick this off?
Go on.
This will be quite short because I really like China Blues. I loved it from the minute it started. That kind of vibe it has. I like the electronics in it. And when about halfway through and that kind of beat kicks in, then I loved it even more. Fantastically, it's not on the vinyl. It's one of the 3 that isn't on the vinyl. And I'm very, very disappointed about that.
That's interesting that it's not on the vinyl, because as you said, it's a really nicely produced track. I do like what you said about it's either sampled or very saturated drums that break out towards the end. They feel very 90s trip hop. It could be a like an early Massive Attack kind of track to it. And as Joe's likened to before, we've had this slightly 90s trip hop kind of sound earlier in the album. So it's interesting that they're revisiting that. The whole track for me sounds like the backing music to a spy scene where someone's infiltrating an enemy base to hack a laptop or something. You know, there's a sinisterness to it. It reminded me of Spooks, if you remember that, like BBC show from back in the day. There's a lot of tension to it. The only thing I was wondering about why it's not on the album is that I'm trying to figure out whether or not it's China-phobic in any kind of way. And I know that you know, like Hawkwind have tried to be on the right side of history about things. And again, I don't have the whole lyrical sheet to completely justify that, but some of the things I was listening to in the lyrics made me feel like it's kind of anti-China in some way, you know, like China blues, sure, fine. But even some of the things they were saying about like, you better vaccinate against this thing which is sweeping the nation. I think maybe they were trying to make a COVID parody, but I think they were talking more about Chinese influence and stuff. So I was wondering whether or not someone looked at like these things and went, yeah, we'll nix that if we ever want to sell this to the various markets, or whether or not at some point they're going to have to redact it. But that's purely a supposition based on the couple of listens I heard. But the track itself is nice, fun to listen to, sinister, has a lot of atmosphere to it. But that would be my only speculation potentially about why it's not so heavily featured.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I'm very surprised that this isn't on the actual vinyl, because I thought this was a pretty strong track as well. But I think, Matt, you might be absolutely correct. Actually, one of the first lyrics in it is talking about, so you start to wheeze and sneeze. So I think what it's talking about is that, you know, that China is the place where COVID came from, which is, well, you know, kind of it's slightly kind of is a bit icky, because it kind of pulls you into that whole idea of when Donald Trump was trying to label COVID as the Chinese virus.
Yep.
And as you say, you really want your bands to be on the right side of history, but unfortunately, you know, and it's difficult to tell from the lyrics. I don't necessarily think that they're trying to say how terrible it is that China has given this disease to the world. I think it's just a fact that saying, well, this is where the disease came from. And China blues, I'm kind of wondering whether there used to be like this was something that you talk about, opium, which, you know, obviously famously used to come from China as well. And, you know, the China blues might be describing kind of opium addiction. And this is like a kind of modern take on it, if you like. Again, I don't know. That's just supposition. But I like this track. It builds quite nicely. It is kind of quite sinister. There's a nice bit of glissando guitar in there for gong fans as well at one point, which is good. And the funky section is pretty good. I'm wondering actually if those drums are sampled. They're certainly being processed in such a way, as you say, that it sounds like it's a loop from a 90s trip hop thing. But I mean, I do have a note here. It sounds like something you might knock out in a couple of hours. But that's not necessarily a criticism, but it does sound like, you know, kind of, hey, you know, let's do this. Now let's do this. Wow, that works, guys. Great. We got a track. But that's fine, because sometimes that's how things come together. So I thought this was okay. I enjoyed this track.
Charitably, I was wondering whether or not the wheeze and sneeze thing was more about like the whole Beijing pollution thing. But yeah, you're right. It could be taken kind of either way. Either way, it doesn't sound like a ringy endorsement of China. So yeah.
So I said I really liked it, and then you dumped on China, and now I feel bad. So let's move on. We have It's Only a Dream,
which has a fantastic intro. For me, that really grabbed attention. I think it was also the only one that I could listen to last week. So it's kind of the quote unquote single. So maybe I've just listened to this one more, but I actually kind of got into this sonically. I feel like it's got it's got a great vibe. It has like a string element to it, which again is like we're piling on the drama a little bit post for us digitally China blues, I guess, still from Counting Sheep. I guess there's still some kind of like themes of paranoia and drama there. And yeah, I think like sonically, it really grabbed my attention. I liked it. It felt very rich, which then led me to this strange battle I had in my head regarding the lyrics. I feel like the lyrics are kind of lazy for Hawkwind. I feel like it lets down the quality of the music a bit. The word grimace, in order to make it work in the structure, really annoys me. And repeat listens haven't sweetened it. But then conversely, the lyric, it's hard to know what to do when everyone relies on you. That lyric hits pretty hard, that idea of like you got a family to support. He talks about mortgages, he talks about like houses and cars and all these things that you have to do. Like that is the kind of the modern day anxiety burden. And I guess it's something which has been happening for a long time. You talk about the stress of the middle class and like, can I afford my rent, can I afford to keep up my lifestyle? If I have a kid, can I afford it? All that kind of stuff. So that idea of like the only a dream, kind of, it's only a dream is what you say when you're having a nightmare to try and dispel it. So I felt like that was a nice name for the track, that idea that like Hawkwind are even like trying to tell themselves what they're feeling is only a dream, and yet the things that they're talking about are very, very real. And again, not like space monsters are coming to eat your face, but that idea that you might get unemployed and therefore get kicked out of your house is also a very real fear. And it's actually in a way a much more tangible fear, because we can kind of appreciate that. And again, given the COVID situation, given the fact that we've had loan rent forgiveness, but people are talking about removing that, people have lost jobs, this is a very contemporary fear. So I like that, even though I thought that some of the lyrics were a little a little first thought. I thought there was some nice ideas in this, which like Hawkwind has done before, has tickled my brain in good ways.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the intro is great. It really does grab you. It's a big intro, guitars and synths going together. It reminded me a little bit of it's like Motorway City in slow motion. But I then find what it then leads into to be, frankly, a little bit pedestrian. It's not a very exciting riff or chord progression, and I don't think it's one of Dave's strongest vocals either. The hard to know what to do when everyone relies on you line is exactly as Matt said, is interesting, but it also put me in mind of course, Brock being the band leader and being in that position, that he's the guy that everybody relies on to lead the band, and sometimes there can be pressure there in that. I'm not sure whether I'm reading too much into it, but that certainly occurred to me. So ironic, I thought this track
actually. I just think ironic there, considering in the podcast we've just got to the point where Brock throws out everyone he can reach in the band. So that's interesting that like now he's like, woe is me about that. But it's like, well, you kind of did this to yourself, dude.
Gosh, well, you're going to be talking about that an awful lot between now, between Astounding Sounds and Somnia when you get to it in 2034. Yeah, so I kind of thought it was a good intro, but then it doesn't really go anywhere for me. It's worth noting there are some of the female backing singers, which they've used a little bit over the last couple of albums, are in there as well, which is quite nice, give it a bit of a Pink Floyd feel towards the end. But I kind of think it didn't really work as well as it could do, this track. So it was okay, but nothing more.
Very much what Joe said, really. Again, like both of you, the intro psyched me up for this to be a bigger track than it then evolves into. The two lines that you both brought up, a grimace, definitely stood out like a sore thumb. And I thought the same around the, you don't have to do when everyone relies on you. That stuck out to me, and in a similar way to the way it stuck out to Joe. The female vocals are interesting because I never see them coming, but they have done it once or twice recently. And it does give a kind of Floydy feel to it. I don't know where it comes from, because obviously those people are not in the band, but it makes the beginning of the track really strong and the end of the track something I quite like. But the middle bit doesn't really do it for me. It's just a little bit thin. And so it's a little bit of a miss for me. It's not a crime, but it's okay, but it's no more than that for me.
So Joe, maybe you'd like to kick off meditation for us?
Yes, indeed. So meditation It's another instrumental interlude, although I think it's about 4 minutes long, so it's a bit longer than an interlude. I quite like this one. It goes almost into kind of territory, hauntological territory, dare I use that word, labels like Ghost Box or Clay Pipe, the kind of stuff that they're putting out, kind of rural, kind of electronica, retro electronica, but with a lot of nice kind of acoustic guitars in there as well. And it harks back to that kind of school's program vibe from the 70s. And then there's some tablas in there as well. And it starts to sound a little bit like Pentangle. So I quite enjoyed this. It's, you know, it's not a big track. It's not massively substantial, but it's nice. I quite like this. It was okay.
It's one of those that that you would never put on a best of list, but it does quite a nice job on the record, basically moving between two tracks, as you say, as a bit of an extended interlude. I like this. It felt, shoegaze is probably completely the wrong word, but it had that effect on me. And what I really picked up on was that you get near the end and then you've got that acoustic guitar comes in. And it reminded me of Jimmy Page circa Led Zeppelin 3 playing his kind of folky, quite aggressively folky acoustic guitar stuff. And I really liked that. And I really wanted that to go on for longer, basically, and it didn't. But I really liked it when that came in. I thought it was a nice way to kind of round out the track. And the voice in it's nice too at that point. So yeah, again, as you say, it's not, wow, this is absolutely amazing. But it does a really nice job, I think, on the album of setting that mood, and then just has some nice instrumentation in it at various points.
Yeah, I think anyone who has been following the kind of tracks that I put, especially onto the sessions playlist that we make, probably won't be too surprised to feel that I am really into this. I like it when Hawkwind does this kind of stuff. You know, there's the kind of spaces deep guitar kind of things, like we said, the Chronoglide Skyway kind of feelings when things get a little bit spacey and a bit dreamy. I like it when they let the guitars do the talking and like give the synths a rest for this kind of stuff. But then when they bring it in, it's always a really nice way of finishing the track and adding that feeling of depth. This track really reminded me of the North Americans, which is a track which is a artist, which is a band that we have put onto the sessions playlist previously, as a very well-defined, well-recorded, slightly chill kind of vibe. It also reminded me a bit of the game Spiritfarer, which came out either late last year or early this year and was written by an artist called Maxime Lacoste-Lebouy. And just anyone who's played that will know that it's very like competitive again. You basically spend your whole time on a boat ferrying spirits from lost worlds in a very kind of cutesy, cel-shaded kind of way. But there's something, that kind of sound works really nicely for this kind of feeling, and it's just interesting to think about the idea of being on a kind of a spiritual voyage in this game, and then listening to this being on a spiritual voyage in the sound. It feels to me kind of like the best bits of the Unsomnia ambient finisher that we had on the first track, but just turned into a full track and given really full time to breathe. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and this is the kind of track that I would definitely throw onto a couple of playlists that I use when I'm working to set a nice vibe. So it's yeah, nowhere near as intense as something like Strange Encounters, but again, the fact that this can exist on the same album as something like Strange Encounters still gives me that feeling that Hawkwind still have a lot of breadth when they put something out.
Cool. Sweet Dreams are made of this. This one weirded me out slightly. Basically, it's very.
The only note that I have is that was weird.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping that Joe makes that 3 out of 3. Then it is weird. It's very tense. The strings on it do create this tension that doesn't exist anywhere else. We've got weird Talky Dave back again, and I like it because of its weirdness. Like, it's not catchy. It's not like exciting. It is just weird. Its placement is perfect coming off the back of Meditation. But yeah, I'm glad it's on the record. I'm glad it's on the vinyl, but it just stands out for its dark, weird tenseness.
Does it feel a bit of a coda for China Blues to you? Because I feel like that kind of still that spy thriller ex-Spooks soundtrack feels like it's part of this as well.
It could be. If it was directly after China Blues, you'd very much, I think of them as a pair.
Yeah, I absolutely agree there. I think this is quite an interesting piece. Starts off with that kind of detuned choir, and then you've got this kind of bit of spooky stab to wake you up, and there's some kind of horror film strings while Dave is reciting this rather stalkery poem. So yeah, it's not very long, but it's nice and it's different and interesting as well. That the other track that comes to mind, which is called Sweet Dreams, other than you've got the Eurythmics track, which is pretty sinister, but then you've also got Sweet Dreams by Jethro Tull, which again is a similar, actually, kind of quite a tense, kind of horrified, kind of sinister kind of track. So there's a definite theme there in the way that title gets used in music. But yeah, it was a little bit interesting, and it's one of those tracks actually that you wonder. I wonder if Hawkwind really went off on a limb and did a whole album like this, or kind of resisted, kind of falling back on the usual kind of space rock, and actually really kind of did like a kind of an off to one side project, based around something like this. So that might be quite interesting.
Yeah, very much so. Kind of in the manner of when they did White Zone or things like this, where they rename it slightly to differentiate it from the canon. Yeah, no, that would be amazing. Absolutely. Who is going to kick us off with I Can't Get You Off My Mind?
So pulling us out of strange, creepy places Hawkwind have yet really to tread comes I Can't Get You Off My Mind, which feels for me a very comfortable place where Hawkwind has been before. This is the first time I feel like this album has felt quote unquote rocky. Like this track 2 is different. It's more aggressive and clattering and boom, swing, bang, crash. This one has the good bits of rock to it for me. It's got a really nice swing to the track. It's got a groove. It has that kind of like head nod thing. There's almost a little bit of dub in the bass still, for me in this, which again I really like. There's a lot of ways in to get your your head nodding and your body moving to this track, which I like. Again, for me, a little bit like the It's Only a Dream. I feel like the lyrics don't justify the track that they're on. I feel like they aren't as well constructed as previous tracks. There's definitely one place where they try to get way too many words into a line. And again, that's a bit like the Grimace on here. It's just the one thing which constantly trips me and pulls me out of where the intro and like the main swing of the track has led me. But like the first track, by the time it's got around to the halfway through point, I feel like I've settled back into it again and I enjoy it for the time it's there. The only thing that then throws me is the fact that the last few bars are just sung, like it feels like it's finished, and then there are these two bars which are just the band singing, which I've never heard Hawkwind do. And again, at the end of a track, when I was expecting this to fade like how they normally do, but no, big fake out. Suddenly these two bars come out of nowhere, and it's just, for me, just reminding me that you can't put a Hawkwind track on and expect it to behave itself. The chances of it doing something strange somewhere along the line to make sure that you're paying full attention to it is good. It's fun because it means that you have to listen to it. But yeah, that idea of like being comfortable in it and grooving along, and then suddenly being weirded out at the end feels very like Hawkwind messing with the listeners in the way that we all know and love.
You've gone into this more than I was going to. I don't like this. Basically, it's strangely on this album, I'm finding that the kind of straight up rock tracks are the ones that I'm having more difficulty with, and the more experimental, weird electronic stuff is the stuff that's really sticking with me. To me, this needs to be more powerful to hold itself as a rock track, as a Hawkwind rock track. So it sounds a bit thin to me. And lyrically, it therefore comes off as kind of Hawkwind doing some pub rock with some synth. The beat doesn't really connect with me either. So all in all, I found this one disappointing. It's my least favorite of them so far.
Okay, I'm probably somewhere in the middle, actually. Certainly, when I've heard other people talk about this track, because this is one of the tracks that was available for advanced listening, certainly the term dad rock has popped up a few times, and I think that's fair. It's the riff it's a bit of a trudgy old status quo riff. I mean, Hawkwind did done this kind of thing for years and years and years on their albums. They do a track, such as Kings of Speed or Curb Crawler or whatever, where it was like, we've got to do a single, guys, and this was a fallback. But I think in its favor, or its defense, maybe I should say, this track clearly does hark back to Dave Brock's heritage as a kind of folk blues singer, busker. It's got the diamond ring reference in it, which is like an old blues reference. It's not a great track, but it's actually is quite catchy. It's the only one of the tracks that I could probably kind of hum back to you at the moment. It's catchy, it's not a great track, but it's okay. And I agree that it probably needs a bit more oomph behind it, but it's not as though Hawkwind haven't done these kind of tracks before. And again, the female backing vocals pop up as well towards the end, which is quite nice. So it's an okay from me.
That's a spirited defense, if ever I heard one. Basically, I didn't realize about the blues reference as well. Maybe I need to listen to this more and reappraise. We shall see. Now, Matt,
how old is Dave Brock now?
80.
Just turned 80. Yeah. So I guess if you're 80 and you get accused of being dad rock, that's still like at least 30 years younger than you are. So that's like high praise.
It's grandpa rock.
Granddad rock. Would
great
be
granddad rock. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Matt, when I messaged you earlier, you were just listening. You just got to Small Objects in Space.
I had, and we're back to a surprise dub number again. It comes back after like teasing us with these strange little like dub elements through tracks. This one is just straight up. Nope, we're going to give this a go. Again, like I said before, I wasn't expecting Hawkwind to be this groovy or this good with it. I actually quite enjoy their dubs. Their dubs sound modern to me. Like I have tracks like I listen to bands like the Space Monkeys, for example, that did a really good dubbed out cover of the first Gorillaz album and things like that. So I kind of like it when it's a little bit spacey without necessarily the kind of like heavy delays and those kind of like bursts of static that you sometimes get on dubs. So this being kind of like a good slow pace head nodder, I think is cool. I actually kind of enjoy it, and at least for me right now, listening to what we have here, it's fresh for me as something that Hawkwind are doing. The singing sounds almost Bowie-esque. I feel like they're kind of, I don't know if it's a different singer or whether the singer is putting on that was the Bowie alarm.
Exactly, that's the Bauer. If you've been wondering what I've been doing kind of by the side of me during this podcast, it's because my wife isn't here today, and it means that I've got the dog, and he's quite a young puppy, and he occasionally gets very excited when he sees something outside. So I've been trying to calm him down, but there you go. His the beast has been unleashed at last. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
Just as you were making a fantastic point about how Hawkwind sound like David Bowie, which is a new one on me, but.
Oh, no. Really? Did you not?
Well, actually, no. That's. I don't know. I need to go back and actually listen to it now that you said that. Actually, I mean, there's all kinds of connections between Hawkwind and Bowie, but actually, Hawkwind sounding like Bowie is a new one on me. But that's interesting.
It's not something that I would say of any other track. I just felt like listening this. I felt like, again, I don't know whether or not it was a deliberate affectation, whether or not I'm mishearing that, whether or not it was a different singer. I'm not sure. But for me, when I listened to it, I thought the singing was like that. But it's not all singing. You know, there is the first part where they're just basically talking about like this telescope that they look through and they see some stuff. Again, I wish I had the lyrics. I'm sounding kind of a bit dumb now, but like, yeah, as a as an interesting little bit of semi-cosmic dub. I like this towards the end of an album. It's nice to find a track that you like towards an end of an album, because, you know, sometimes you just feel it's a bit like, well, that'll do, to throw on there. But no, I appreciated this for what it was. It was nice. For me, it flies in the face of the Somnia theme. It's kind of like its own little thing. Again, maybe it's the only one with really a space reference, if you'll ignore the potential for Alcyone to be the star. This, again, in a couple of the 70s albums which we've talked about, things like Warrior on the Edge of Time, there's like one or two tracks in there which could be interpreted more spacey, and I like those more. I feel like that's where Hawkwind still find home in, even though they explore other things. Like here, whatever they're exploring, the idea of like sleep paralysis or not being able to sleep or whatever they're doing, to me it's a little fuzzy, this topic that they've come up with. But when they just go small objects in space, they instantly sound more comfortable to me, and I feel like more comfortable listening to it.
That's an interesting breakdown. This is another one of those tracks which I did enjoy, but it does sound a little bit like we've got a load of bits and pieces here and we're going to chuck them all together and see what happens. And I think a lot of it does kind of work quite nicely. It starts off with a bit of a kind of Floydy feel, then it stops. There's a kind of Sarte-esque piano riff. Then we're into kind of funky Floyd again. It sounds like a bit like Echoes. And then we got some jazzy piano. and then there's a samba section as well. So it does sound a bit like they're throwing everything and the kitchen sink in there. But I mean, that, as you say, is kind of a feature of more dub-oriented tracks, is to, you know, kind of have that kind of dub through line and then lots of other stuff happening around it. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It did sound like it was a collection of pieces strung together rather than a coherent composition. But yeah, it was fine. I quite liked it.
I really like this one, which is funny. I'd much prefer the dub aspects of this one than I did the dub elements of that previous track. It feels to me like it really fits this track and the vibe of the track. Talkie Dave is back, and it's probably my favorite bit of Talkie Dave, of the various Talkie Dave tracks that we have on this album. And I like the way that the different elements come in. It definitely does feel like I've got this piece that I did over here. Will that work if I shove it into this track? But it actually kind of does work, almost surprisingly. In fact, the track is more than the sum of its parts, which, given how disparate the sum of the parts are, is kind of surprising. Even there's there's a clap track in there which I've not really heard in Hawkwind tracks, at least not for a while that I can remember, and I quite like that too. So the piano, again, my kind of ears perked up, and it's like, what's that? What's that doing? Oh, it's there. Okay. But it all feels very pleasing to me, how it all fits together, this little melting pot. And yeah, I did like this track. And we get to Pulsestar, which is actually the final track on the vinyl. And I love the way I actually love this as the final track on the album, although I like some of the other stuff too. It's very dark, very ambient, and a very nice way to transition out the album for me. It does its thing really, really nicely. It's not one of those tracks that has lots of different parts to it and goes in lots of different directions and has lots of different components. It just sets out to do a dark ambient job, and it does that dark ambient job darkly and ambiently. And I really appreciate it. I like this track. This is one I would go back to. And Matt, I expected you to like this one.
And I do, on the whole. Yeah, I think there's a nice transition right out of the previous track into this track, which I always appreciate when Hawkwind find a way to do that. It just carries on their journeys, and you do feel that for whatever we talk about with their albums, they do try to make them some kind of journey. So I do like it when they do a little fade or a reference to previous tracks. I think that's always nice. I thought this was kind of like a nice mental palate cleanser. For me, listening to it, it was a nice mental palate cleanser into more dub, but the idea of this finishing the record makes sense to me. I guess that we haven't finished yet the editing this, but we have recorded Quark's Strangeness and Charm, and we spent a lot of time talking about how Hawkwind ended that album with that kind of extra bit of sound design at the end, which almost sounds like the government are coming to get you, and that's a great way of finishing the whole point of that album. So this to finish on some dark ambience for me was a interesting sonic thought exercise between the idea of the album finally being able to get to sleep, but potentially there could be a troubled sleep. Like it may not be a blissful sleep or a restful sleep. It could be that kind of sleep paralysis. It could be that feeling of like, did you just pass out from exhaustion? Either way, it's finished, but it's finished just in that way where you're not left with that kind of like everything's going to be all right release, which is what you don't want that from Hawkwind. You want that tension. So the ability to wrap up the track but leave that tension isn't easy to do in ambient stuff. I find I have a lot of ambient records, and a lot of them like do tend to try and resolve themselves nicely in the end, or resolve themselves at least to a kind of 0 point. And I feel like this just leaves you just on like the edge, which actually from a craft point of view, I have a lot of respect for.
I'm afraid I just have the word ambient written down on my notes here. In fairness, it's not a very long track, but it's great, and it is the kind of thing that Hawkwind could do in their sleep. Boom, boom. And they do, and it's nice, yeah. So they're kind of masters of these kind of small pieces of sound design. As you say, it's an interesting way to end the album, but a good way, I think.
Because I've definitely called Hawkwind in the 70s for having these little like 20 or 30 second blips and being like, why? So it's kind of interesting that they've done one here, and I'm for it. So I guess that's something that I will grow to like about their stuff.
Del Detmar did not write this piece.
No, or maybe they're just putting them in the right place now, rather than like Del just like going like, no, can I put it in between these two tracks for no reason? Please, I'll go on, let me, please.
Well, it's the end of the vinyl, but it's not the end of the digital album. The next one is Barkus. And Joe, I think you should lead off here, because if there was one piece of us talking where it would be brilliant if your dog was to interrupt us, it's on a track called Barkus.
Yeah, I looked this up, and hang on a sec. Here he is. Here's the dog. So he's here we go. This is useless because there are no viewers of this podcast, so you'll have to edit this bit out.
I thought you meant that was his name. Wow, that would be
amazing.
His name is Lemmy.
Nice.
And the thing is that my children actually named him before we got him. They said, "Dad, we could get a dog and we'll call him Lemmy," because they were trying for years and years for me to get a dog. And I was resisting, and eventually they got him. So anyway, here's Lemmy.
What is it with Lemmy causing so much chaos and destruction in a Hawkwind podcast? I mean, seriously, like there's a strange parity there.
Yeah. I looked this word up thinking Barkus, what's that? And of course I think it's actually it's meant to be the is it the Greek or Roman god of having a good time, Bacchus. And I think it's Bacchus in canine form, because both Dave and Chris are very big dog lovers, so maybe that's where it comes from. I got that it's quite experimental. It's dubby again. There's another slightly sinister recitation, which is good. It's a good start. And then there's a nice bit of sax, which we haven't heard so far on the album. But it just kind of drifts a bit. It's a bit jammy. It's fine, but it very much feels like an extra track.
I liked this one. The kind of it had an element of madness to it at the beginning, basically, and some of the rhythms are very cool. We get Talky Dave again, and some clean guitar lines through in this, which really fit with the track quite nicely. And I quite like this run of tracks that we're on in this kind of downbeat part of the album. And I like the machines that are on it, and it reminded me a little bit of Church of Hawkwind, which Matt, you won't get to for another 8 months.
This is just more dub from Hawkwind, which is fine. I think the faded mic effect actually even makes this more dubby than the previous one. So I just feel like they're just layering on dubness every time they make one of these tracks. So this again reminded me of potentially more contemporary kind of dub. Again, it has this kind of Space Monkeys vibe for me. The faded vocals sounds like old radio stations. I think this is just the rushness of this. As we got towards the end of the album, my notes are kind of running out a little bit, but I did like the faded mic effect. The dissolving into sound design at the end I thought was nice. I feel like in a way when we look at this, Hawkwind ends the album 3 times. Like Pulsestar is a perfectly good end. The end of Barkus is a perfectly good end. And I guess kind of like the next one we talk about, the Cave of Phantom Dreams, is a nice end. So it's kind of like you pick it's one of those choose your own adventures. You pick whichever ending you like and you can go with that.
Which then gives us Cave of Phantom Dreams. Who wants to kick off?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're saying, because we are now getting to the end of the album and these kind of feel like extra tracks. And I don't know whether they just feel like extra tracks because they're at the end and we know that they're extra tracks. It's a nice start. There's a kind of high string and choir kind of keyboard kind of thing there. Spoken words, I think, from Magnus this time. And then it kind of dissolves into a little bit of kind of general noise. It's kind of experimental, but it's a bit half-assed experimental, if I'm honest. But interesting that Andy mentions Church of Hawkwind, because there's a synth pulse which comes in towards the end, which really, really reminds me of the sort of synth pulse at the start of Some People Never Die, which is a track I absolutely love. So that was interesting, just to kind of hear something like that. But overall, again, just a bonus track for me.
Fair. This is this one and Barkus are the other 2 tracks, along with China Blues, which are not on the vinyl. Again, I like this because I find I can just like sink into it. It's not one that I listen to and pick things out of and get excited about, but it's a mood piece for me. And they are probably things which are quite quick to throw together and probably not that difficult to do, but I quite like the mood that they put me in. If anything, actually, the voice on this, I could do without it. I'd sink easier into it if the voice wasn't there. So on the other ones, on the ones with Talkie Dave, his voice is fine. It seems to fit the track, and his voice seem to fit together. In this one, the voice slightly stirs me out of the mood I want to sink into. But other than that, as Matt says, it's the 3rd good ending to the album in a row. Probably the way they do it on the vinyl with Pulsestar is probably the best of the 3 ways to end the album. So, good job there. But yeah, it's not offensive. I don't hate it. It's quite nice. I'm kind of pleased it's there. Not an album highlight, but it does okay.
There's a couple of strange links I have in my brain listening to this track. The first one takes me back to Space Ritual, when you hear the whole thing played as a whole live experience. And at the end, just towards the end, I said before, they do that awkward crowd work where they talk about like supporting Chelsea and that kind of thing. Yeah. And I forget that Hawkwind have accents. And the fact that this is the first track which sounds heavily accented really kind of surprised me and kind of made me laugh the first time I heard of it, because it was just, I wasn't expecting it. And it has that kind of, that sort of accented charm, but weirdly also kind of made me miss home a little bit, because what with travel restrictions and COVID and all that kind of stuff, I haven't been back to the UK since 2018. So to hear an accent like that in a country where that is very rare kind of hit me in a strange way. So to end the album like that was a little bit of just a personal prang, but it was just funny that listening to that just reminded me of how Space Ritual ends, with that kind of feeling of like, oh yeah, Hawkwind are people, because I feel like sometimes I forget that. And I think the way that they play and the way that they present themselves, I know, like we talk about, like, the drama and stuff and how they all work, but whenever they put an album together, it is always Hawkwind to me, which is this strange kind of like this impulsive mass which is producing sound, and I don't really know how to like identify things. So yeah, when I somehow pick out a stray piece of humanity, it's always interesting to find. I don't know quite why, but it reminded me a little bit of We Took the Wrong Step years ago, and I can't quite identify why. I'd like to listen to it one more time in order to justify that, but I do have it in my notes. So I look forward to justifying that note in about 2.5 years' time when we get back to doing this properly. But now I get to channel Andy and go, that was that was Somnia by Hawkwind. And an interesting time for us on the podcast to all have listened to this for the first time, even though I'm still technically naive compared to your guys' collective knowledge of the band and what they have done and who they are. Do you have any final concluding thoughts as to how this album has left you on the first couple of times of listening?
I think it's a reasonably strong collection, actually. Having heard the advanced tracks, which were can't get you off my mind.
It's Only a Dream and Unsomnia.
It's Only a Dream and Unsomnia, exactly. I liked Unsomnia, but the other two were a bit like, okay, that's fine. But there's a lot more interesting stuff on the album than those advanced tracks would suggest. And I think that the first 3 tracks together, which effectively form side 1 of the vinyl, is a very strong side 1. I think this is an album with a very strong side 1. And it's an album with some interesting tracks on side 2. So in a way, it puts me in mind of Astounding Sounds, simply because that's exactly how Astounding Sounds works for me as well. A very strong first side, and then a second side which has got some interesting stuff on, but I probably wouldn't revisit as much. But it is, I mean, it is amazing that Hawkwind is still there, after 52 years. So is it still going, still putting these albums out? And they're not just kind of cashing in on former glories. They are still trying to do something new, for which they should be, absolutely applauded. I can't think of any other band really that's still doing, kind of stuff like this, this far out, where they're not just kind of falling back on the back catalogue the whole time. I mean, Hawkwind did go for a phase of covering themselves and Dave ripping himself off quite a lot on his lyrics, but now they're actually, they're still trying to push out into new territory. So, that is interesting in itself. So I think this is a collection of music that every Hawkwind fan, even if they feel that they don't particularly like the new stuff, I think it's worth giving a listen to.
I'm very, very much in your camp on this one, Joe. As I say, I'm kind of nervous before listening to these albums, but there's each time I find there are, bits of magic on these albums, bits of the old magic in here, but actually the old magic is in doing new things rather than, oh, this is like Golden Void, so I like it. It's actually the delight in them still going to the studio to be creative. Not to follow a formula, basically, not, oh, we need to do stuff within the Hawkwind template, whatever on earth that could be at this point. We just go into the studio, record the stuff that we want to record and put it down. I love that about Hawkwind. And I think that's probably why it's the newer, more experimental stuff on here that I gravitate towards than the things that sound like the kind of rock tracks that they put on previous albums. I think there are, out of 13 tracks, there are 5 tracks on here that I would say, even on first listen, I really like them. And that's not bad for a first hit, given that all the Hawkwind albums I really love have sat with me for many, many years. And I don't think you could expect to get a completely new album and have it connect with you in the same way that an album that you've known and loved for 20 years or 30 years or more is going to do. I think all you can really hope for is that there is some creativity, something that you can kind of grab onto and go, I like that, and that's my way in. And then through that, you kind of start to get into the other stuff, a bit like Matt does with the new albums that he's listening to every time we do an episode. There has to be something to kind of grab you and bring you into the album, and then you can grow out from there. And there's plenty of that on this album. There's some stuff that leaves me a little bit more cold. There's some stuff that doesn't really work for me, but who knows? My repeated listens might, make me grow to like those things. but there are definitely tracks here that will bring me back to this album many times. Certainly in the next few days, this will be on fairly hefty rotation. And so I'm relieved. And yeah, there's some good stuff on here. How about you, Matt? This is us being in the same position as you for the first time ever.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about how I've been listening to Hawkwind and listening to this, jumping the timeline, I'm kind of amazed how I still can never guess what they're going to be doing. Like you said, they haven't gone back to previous things. They are throwing in dub experimentations. They are still taking synth work to, new interesting sounds. Their soundcraft is still really, really nice. They haven't suffered from a higher fidelity of recording, even at the age that they are playing. It sounds like this album could be by, a more contemporary band, not a band with such a strong legacy. Even things like the sampled drums or the heavily processed drums, that's throwing in more things, and it oftentimes it does work. Like you said, it's interesting that the track which feels the most Hawkwind-esque, like the rocky track, the I Can't Get You Off My Mind is the one which feels the most derivative, because I guess they've been doing that for so long, and you don't expect Hawkwind to be in one place for very long. Hawkwind I've likened, I think before, to a shark, like it can't stop swimming or it'll die. And I think that Hawkwind are very much like that they have to be progressing and doing things. And the fact they're still putting out albums with a clear passion, even though there are some things that I think we have dinged it on, we're doing it with love. We don't not like the album. And even with a couple of listens, we already have way more to talk about than I thought even maybe we would. So I think this has been largely very, very successful, and it makes me want to get back into seeing how we get to here from everywhere else.
Indeed, we have a journey of 42 years back in time to get 25 years on, which is a strange turn of phrase, if ever I heard one.
Absolutely.
Joe, you've survived your first trip to Hawkbinge.
Yes, and I've enjoyed it immensely as well. Thank you for having me, guys. Any chance to kind of just pontificate about Hawkwind, I never turn it down. I'm always happy to do that.
Well, we're 2 albums away from 2 or 3 albums away from the end of the 70s in our normal run, and given that is the period that your epic volume covers, it would be fantastic if you'd come back on at the end of that and basically do a bit of a Hawkwind in the 70s chat with us. That would be excellent.
I would absolutely love that. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, there you have it. That is a strong promotion for a future episode. And now it's on record, so you can't retract that.
Back out of it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So to finish the podcast, I would like to thank Andy and Joe for letting me take over and completely messing with the timeline. We know that this was a slightly more scrappy episode because we are trying to get it out as quickly as possible. Thank you very much for appreciating however this sounds. We don't know yet because I'm about to get all the MP3 files and we'll see what we can do with it. But thanks again for coming with us on this voyage. We will now return you to the normal timeline, and normal service will be resumed shortly as we return to the days of the underground.